Greetings, and once again, welcome to AutoCAD's Essential Training. This is the third part and the final part in our AutoCAD Essentials training series. This is brought to you by Florida Department of Transportation and the Plan Production Office in the CAD Department. My name is Mike Rocca, and I will be your presenter today. So let's go ahead and get started. In today's session, we're going to talk about working with layers. We're going to talk about how layers control the visibility of objects and how to assign properties such as color and line types and names to layers, and then we'll talk about layer states as well. And then we'll go into block basics. We'll talk about inserting a block from a tool palette, how to insert existing blocks from other drawings or from the current drawing you have open. We'll go into browsing for blocks, inserting block settings, and we'll even make a small block. Then we'll go into a paper space and model space topics. We'll talk about the difference between model space and the paper space tab and the layout tab, and how they function for plotting and scaling and bringing in title blocks. And then from there we'll jump into printing and plotting essentials. We'll talk about what it takes to get ready to print, what page setups mean and all the settings for that, and how to insert existing page setups from templates in our Florida State Kit library. And then last but not least, we'll go into external references, or otherwise referred to as Xrefs. We'll talk about the external reference dialog box palette and all the settings that are involved in it. We'll talk about external reference settings and the two differences between an attachment and an overlay reference type. Okay, so like I said before, what we're going to talk about is working with layers. What are layers? What do they do? What are their functions? So we're going to talk about how layers are being used to control the visibility of objects in our drawing, and how we can assign properties such as color and line types. Objects on a layer normally assume the properties of that layer. However, you can override any layer property of an object. For example, if an object's color property is set to by layer, the object displays the color of that layer. If the object's layer is set to red, the object displays it as red, regardless of the color assigned to that layer. That's known as layer overrides, and we'll get more into that momentarily. Layers are a primary method for organizing the objects in a drawing by function or purpose. Layers can reduce the visual complexity of a drawing and improve display performance by allowing you to hide information that you don't need to see at the moment. When you're using the FDOT Civil 3D State Kit, layers are already defined for you in any drawing you create. After you create a new drawing, you set the layer that you wish to use as current and then continue drawing on that layer. Everything you draw should go on a layer, no exceptions. The good news is that once you get Civil 3D involved, it will push things to the correct layer. Layers are key to AutoCAD in keeping your drawings well organized. They are especially valuable when it comes to printing because you can freeze items that you don't wish to display on a plot. When you start a drawing, the line that is being created is going to be on the current layer. So with that said, let's go ahead and open up a drawing, and we'll take a look at how to create these layers and how to work with them. So I already have a drawing here open, but I want to go ahead and start from the very beginning of creating a new drawing. If you go to the FDOT ribbon, we're going to say Create File, and we're already pointing at a project, and I'm just going to go down the list here, and I'm going to choose the Proposed Design option. When I choose that, it's going to create an output file called DSGN-RD01. That's basically Design Road 04 file. It's going to put it in the roadway folder, and it's coming from an FDOT-DWT template, or FDOT-master.dwt template. And here's the path to that file. So I'm going to go ahead and say create an open file. You'll see it open up in the background. Just give it a moment. And then we'll say go ahead and click on close. So when I created that drawing, I pointed out that it was being created from an FDOT-master.dwt, and it converted the name and called it DSGN RD04 with a DWG extension for a drawing. So it went from a template to a drawing. If you want to take a look at that template, if we go over here to Open and go to Files, a Type, and click on Drawing Template, you can see that the filter changes, even the path changes, and it points to our installation directory, to the data folder, to the templates folder. And here is that FDOT-Master template. So I'm just going to go ahead and open it momentarily. It's going to open in read-only state. That's fine. Click Yes. And let it load up. And then if we go to Layers Property panel, or the Layers panel on the Home ribbon, or Home tab, we can click on the down arrow and we can see that all these layers are already pre-set up for us in the Civil 3D State Kit, or FDOT Civil 3D State Kit. Okay, so you know when it takes this drawing and renames it that you're going to get all these layers that are already defined in here for you. Okay, so I just wanted to point out where these layers are coming from, what a template is, and where those templates or where these templates reside at in your installation. So with that being said, here's the FDOT-Master DWT file. I'm going to go ahead and close it out. And let's go back to our drawing. So here in this in the drawing file, once again on the Home ribbon under the Layers panel, if I click on this down arrow for layers, those are all the same layers that were in that FDOT-Master template. Okay. When I come in here, it starts on layer 0. Every drawing has a layer 0 defined in it. Even if it's a blank drawing, nothing in it, you still have one layer in there called 0. You don't really ever draw on that layer. What that layer is for is to be used as a reference to create a new layer off of. So you're always given like a base layer 0, and then you take that layer, copy it, and give it a name and assign properties to it, such as color, line type, line style, and description. So that's how all these other layers came about, is being based off of this layer 0. So what you would normally do is you could come in here and you can pick a layer. I'm just going to pick any layer, nothing particular. Maybe I'll pick this bridge layer. I want to point out that the color of it is green, is assigned to that layer. So if I pick it, that is now my current layer that I'm drawing on. So if I execute the line command, I'm going to get a green line because that's the properties of that layer. If I come up here and choose a different layer, let's say this building layer, and execute the line command, I'm going to get a blue line. Okay, so it's pretty simple. So let's go in here and take a look at the Layers Property Manager box to look and see what all these settings mean. So I'm going to start over here. I'm going to go ahead and click on All to filter, to turn on the All filter. So I see all of my layers that are contained in my drawing. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at these columns first and what they mean. So this first column you have is called the Status column. It represents like a sheet of paper, kind of like sheets of paper being laid on top of each other in layers. If it's a if you see this icon is dark, that means that you have objects drawn on that layer. If you see it in a lighter color, which they are now, that means that nothing has been drawn on that layer yet. So that's basically just two statuses. Either you have something on that layer or you don't have anything on that layer. And that's important to know because you cannot delete a layer if it has objects on it. So if you see this status colored in and you try to delete this particular layer, you'll get a warning message telling you that you can't delete it either because it's the current layer, it's layer that has objects on it, or it's layer 0. You also can't delete layer 0. And then you have the next step, which is the next column, which is your name. If you want to know what that name means, you can go over to the right here and we have a description for each layer name. Okay, so that kind of helps you navigate through your layers and start to get familiar with them and discover what each one of these layer names mean. The next column we have is on, and on is represented by a light bulb. So if you click on that icon, that light bulb turns gray. If you click on it again, the light bulb comes on. What that's doing is that's turning on and off the layers in your drawing. So anything that's drawn on this particular layer, if I click this, that layer is turned off. It's not erased or anything, it's just turned off so you visibly don't see it. Okay. The next step we have is freeze. Freeze is just like turning it off and on, but if you turn it off, it not only turns it off, but it freezes it in place, meaning that you can't accidentally erase it or change it. It also helps improve the speed of your file because it takes that layer out of memory when you go to manipulate your drawing, whether you're zooming in or out, you're turning that drawing off and on, or closing it, saving it, opening it back up. You'll notice a little bit of performance increase because you're freezing that layer, you're freezing it in place, and you're turning it off. If I just click on this light bulb, and for example, I issue the erase command and then use my selection tool all to erase everything, even though if I don't see the objects on a layer that uses the light bulb to turn off and on, it will still delete it. Okay? If I freeze it and use erase all, it won't delete it because it's frozen in place and it's turned off. So next we go one step up. We have this lock icon. If I click that, it shows that layer in a lock state. If I click it again, it shows in an unlocked state. So basically what that does is it leaves the layer turned on, but it locks it in place. So I can't go over and click on it and erase it or move it or copy it or anything. It is locked down in place. If I want to manipulate anything on that layer, I'd have to come through and unlock it to start changing it. Okay. The next column we have is for plot. If you see this this red icon next to it, that means that anything on that layer is not going to plot. So that's good for like a construction layer where you're using like construction lines to lay out your geometry, and you don't want any of those lines to plot in your drawing. You can come through and click on that icon, and even though you can still see it and use it and work with it, it will not come out in a plot. Okay. The next column we have is color. This allows you to assign a color to the layer. If you click on the color, the dialog box comes up and allows you to pick from any of these index colors, or you can pick from one of the generic 8 colors, which are or 9 colors, excuse me, which are most commonly used. Then you have a line type column. If you click on the word line type, it'll show you what that line looks like that's being applied to it. You can see we have dash lines, and we have some MicroStation lines that were brought in and imported that use the same naming convention that we have in MicroStation. Then you have like existing storm, sewer, utility line types, and phantom line types. You can go through. If you do not see a line type in here, but you know it's available, you can click on the load button, and then what it's doing is it's looking at an external.lin file. You click on the file again, and you can select the FDOT line type file. So this is where you would go to load any custom line type. So maybe you have a drawing that you haven't done using the FDOT state kit, but you want to bring in some of our line types. Well, you could simply load the line type file, the .lin file, browse to our state kit directory under support line type, select this file, click open, and then load one of our line types into the current file that you are working on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel on that and cancel again. Next we have is a line weight. So when you're drawing on that layer, how thick is the line weight going to be? Okay, that's what the line weight option's for. Then we have plot style. As you can see, most things that I've got right now are selected to 255. Well, what does that 255 mean? Let's see, and if I scroll down, I should have other ones in here besides 255, perhaps down towards the bottom. Maybe not in this particular file. If I double click on 255, it brings up a plot style, and it says that 255 is assigned to that layer. If I come over here to editor, it tells me that no matter what color I have assigned to this layer, when I go to print it, 255 means to print as a solid black color. Okay. If it says 000, that means it may come out as some grayscale color. If it's 211, it'll be a lighter gray. 175, it'll come out as a halftone. And 125, it'll come out as a dark grayscale. Okay, so that's what these numbers mean. It's using a page plot style by number to determine the outlook or the result of the file when it's being printed. Then last but not least, we have a description here that you can click in and edit or change, which is pretty straightforward. If we come over here to the left, we have these filters. Right now I have all selected, so I see all the filters in my drawing. If I click on all used filters, it'll change and show all the layers that are being currently used in the file. I can select drafting elements, and it gives me a drafting elements layers, such as match lines, construction clouds. We have miscellaneous and scratch layers. And then if I expand the standards filter, you can filter it based off of our standards. So if you're working with an alignment drawing, you would have the alignment filter on. If you are working with a clip file or a design file, you can pick on these and you can kind of see how they filter out and change and give you the layer names that are specific to that standard. Up on the top here, we have the option to create a new layer. So if I click on this box, what it does is it takes the layer that I had selected and makes a copy of it, and it calls it layer name by default. So I can call this, let's say for example, we'll call this maybe EOP for edge of pavement. And then I can come through over here and I can give it a color that I want. And then I can give it a line type that I may want to use. Right now I'm just kind of just picking anything randomly. And I can give it the plot style that I want it to look like when I want it to print me. I want it to come out at a grayscale of 125. And then I can go ahead to the right here and I can call this E edge of pavement. Okay. I'm going to go over here to the far left. I want to make this my current layer when I start drawing on it. So I'll double click on it and it places a check next to it. When I close out of Layer Manager, you can see that edge of pavement is my new layer that I just created. If I execute the line command and draw it, it's going to come out yellow with that dashed line type. If I come back into my Layers Property Manager or my Layers pull-down menu, if I click on color and say, you know what, I actually don't want that to be yellow, I want that to be red, click OK, that updates it in my file because that object is being controlled by the layer. Okay, so what if I don't want to control it by the layer? I've got, maybe I've got a couple of lines in here that I drew on edge of pavement, but I actually want one of these to be yellow. Well, you could select the object, go into properties, and say, you know what, I want that actually to not be controlled by the layer, but I want it to be yellow. So now I have one line that's yellow and one that's red because one object is being controlled by layer and one has an object property override on it, which means it's just being controlled by the color itself. So if I come over here to edge of pavement, select the box, choose a different color, click OK, just that one layer, just that one object changed color because this one has a property override. So to correct that, what I can do is I can select that line again because that's really not the proper drafting method or the preferred drafting method. You want to leave everything by layer and control the colors by this. You really want to stay away from property overrides. But if you select it, go into properties, I'll go up on top here and I'll choose by layer, and you can see that it resets itself and now it's being controlled properly by the layers property manager. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at a drawing that has some objects in it. So I'm going to go ahead and close this drawing. I'm going to click no to saving it. And here we have a drawing that's got some proposed objects on it. There's edge of sidewalk, there's median in it, there's proposed, edge of pavement, proposed sidewalk, traffic separator, there's an island in here. If we come up here to the top, back in our layers panel, we can click on this down arrow for layers and we get a few more options. These options are for layer states. So what this is basically is if I go into my layers property manager, let me just back up a little bit here. If I go in my layers property manager and I turn off a bunch of layers that I want to show up in my drawing, what I can do is once I have all that set up, I can close this. I can go to Layer States, and I can say New Layer State, and I can give this a name. I'll just call this Training. And I can give this a description, and then click OK. And now when I come up here to my layer states, I have one that's called Training. I can go to a different layer state that'll go back and it'll turn additional layers off and on. So you can give this drawing a state by changing the layers and then give that state a name, and then those names will be available to you in a list. And by default, we already have a bunch of layer states in here set up for you. So if you're drawing an alignment, it goes through and just turns on the alignment layers, for example. Or if you're doing a drainage or a design file or what have you, it will turn those layers off and on. And if you kind of look as you bring your cursor down through the list, I'm trying to show a good example here. You'll see how some of those layers turn off and on in the background without even having to click on it. So where is it at here? Which one? Maybe I'm going too quick. Okay, so that's all layers on. I go to another layer state and turn some of them off. So you can kind of go back and forth and see how those work. So that's layer states. If you have some layers that are locked, you have an option to turn fading off and on. So you have layers that are turned on, locked in place, but you don't want them to show up so much. Maybe you're trying to draw on top. Maybe you have like an existing drawing and you want to fade those back a little bit so you can draw your proposed stuff on top of it. Some other options we have here is, let's say if I want to draw on this layer, so I can select it and then come up here and maybe choose sidewalk back and make it current, or I could do it a little quicker way. I can come over here and say make current, select that layer, and now I'm drawing on that current layer. So I don't have to like remember the names or have to come up here and filter through this list. I could just simply say make current, select the layer I want to start drawing on, and that's my current layer. Now I'll draw blue lines or green lines or whatever I have set as current. Also, like we had in the layers property manager, we had the option to turn layers off and on, freeze them, or thaw them. You could do the same thing here. You can pick them in the screen instead of selecting them by name. So if I choose layer off, I can come over here and click on this object, and all the objects that are on that layer will get turned off. If I want to go back to the previous state, maybe I turned off a few layers here. Oh, I can't turn off that layer because that's my current layer. Let me pick a different one here. If I want to bring those layers back up to the way I had it, I can go to the pull down menu and this option on the left. That's previous. That's kind of like undoing changes, but it's undoing changes to layers. So if I click that, you'll see that my layers will start to come back on. Okay, so I don't have to go back and do this list of 200, 300 layers and try to find the one I had off and on. I can just click undo and it'll bring those layers back up. So just like we had the option to turn layers off and on, we have the option to freeze them as well and lock them in place. We already looked at the make current. We have this option to match layer. That changes the layer of a selected object to match the destination layer. So if I just drew a line here and I wanted to match that layer, I could pick this option, select the layer that I want to match, and then click the other one and it'll change. There we go. I'll just choose yes at the command line and it'll match that layer. So I'm going to do that one more time. So I'll say match layer. I want to match this layer. I'll right click to go to the next step. I'll select my destination layer and it changes it to green. If I have several layers that I have thawed and turned off, I could come up here to the top and say go ahead and thaw all those layers, turn them back on. Same thing works with turning all layers off and on that use the light bulb, and same thing with the lock. And again, I just want to show you real quick, if I go to Layers Property Manager, up on top there is a way to search for layers. Let me move this palette over to the side. You could come up here to the top, and at the asterisk or before the asterisk, which is kind of like a wildcard character for filtering out and searching for objects, I can say I want to show all the layers that begin with sanitary. So I'll type in SAN, and you can see the Layers Property Manager automatically updates and shows me all the layers that begin with those three letters. So Layers Property Filter, or the search layer option, is a very powerful tool and gets used on a regular basis. So I just wanted to point that out. And just one more thing I would like to show before we go to our next section, which is block basics, is what happens if you try to delete a layer. Let's say, for example, I have this shoulder paved. It's my current layer. If I right click on it, I can choose to delete layer, and it tells me that that layer cannot be deleted. And again, because you cannot delete layers that are 0, you can't delete the current layer, you can't delete layers that are containing objects, and you can't delete external reference dependent layers. Okay, that's layers that are relying on an external drawing that's been attached to the current drawing that you're working on. Those can't be deleted either. You have to you can actually detach the drawing, but you can't delete the layers. Let's go ahead and click close to that, and let's go ahead and take a look at our next chapter, which is block basics. So if you're a MicroStation user, in MicroStation you have what's known as cells. Well, in AutoCAD, they are known as blocks. A block is a group of AutoCAD objects that have been tied together and given a name to define that group. For example, in this little screenshot here, we have a suitcase. That suitcase was created using arcs and lines. It looks like some text. And then you use the block command to pick all of those objects, give it a name, and then pick a base point. And that base point is the point that's going to be used every time you go to reinsert that block back into your file, or or from another file into the file that you currently are using. So in this session, we're going to learn how to insert blocks from a tool palette, insert blocks that already exist in a drawing, and insert blocks that come from an external drawing file. And then we'll just kind of quickly go over the steps to perhaps create or define your own blocks. Okay, so let's take a look at how we can insert blocks into our drawing. We're going to first take a look at inserting blocks from a tool palette. Remember that most palettes you can access from the Home ribbon on the Palettes panel. So let's go over to the Home ribbon. On the Palettes panel next to Tool Space, down here on the bottom left-hand corner, we have Tool Palettes. So when I select that, we get a set of FDOT Civil 3D tool palettes that first come up here. Here we have the FDOT Civil blocks that come up. If we right click on this sidebar here, we can bring up other tool palettes, such as FDOT subassemblies if you're doing Civil 3D modeling, 3D modeling. We've got a set of FDOT structures, FDOT traffic, and you just left click on them and you'll notice how the tool palette changes and gives you access to those palettes. So just real quick, we'll take a look at some of these. If I come up to FDOT Civil blocks, you'll notice that we have some blocks in here that have this little looks like electric bolt symbol next to them. That means that these are dynamic blocks. That means that these blocks have some type of action associated to them, whether it's changing the size of them, changing the state of them, or what have you. There's some different variations to these blocks. So just real quick, we'll just take a look at this traffic separator with a tapered median. If I select that block and bring my cursor over my drawing, some of the dynamic features to this block is the fact that if I bring my cursor over an object, you can see how the block realigns itself to that object. So I can just left click to place that block in here, and then maybe I'll use the move command to move it to the center of my road. And then if I come over here, again, some other features to dynamic blocks. If I select that block, I get these grips, and some of these grips perform different functions. For example, if I click on this arrow here and drag my cursor down, I can change the length of that median. And if I select this block here and bring my cursor out, I can change the width of it. So that's the function of a dynamic block. To look at some other blocks here, we'll go down and we'll choose maybe FDOT structures. And you can see we have these several different tabs. We have tabs for annotation, for barriers, borders, sheet borders. I'm not going to go through all these, but I just want to show you that you have multiple options here of inserting different types of blocks. We'll right click, we can go down here to FDOT traffic. We have some signal blocks, some signal heads, and I'll just place a few of these. You can just left click on them and you'll get the your cursor will change. Again, you get the crosshair, meaning it's waiting for you to pick a point, insertion point in your drawing, and just left click. This particular block here looks like it has some attributes to it. So it has a field. So let's say if I type in 1, click OK, that X will update to a 1. And again, you can see we have a few more dynamic blocks in here. So I highly recommend that you take a look at tool palettes, because FDOT has lots of custom palettes that get installed when you install the state kit. And get familiar with what type of blocks we have and where they're located. Another way to insert blocks is using what's known as the Design Center. And the Design Center again is on a palette. So if we go to the Home ribbon under Palettes, I'll click on the down arrow here, and we have on the top left hand corner, second to the left here, we have Design Center. Or you can type in DC and that will launch Design Center also. Basically what Design Center is, it's kind of like Windows Explorer, but it's built into Civil 3D or AutoCAD. And it allows you to browse for other drawings that are installed either on your local drive or on the network, and borrow objects or entities from a particular drawing. So for example, if I go to my local disk C here, and I go to my installation directory, and I go down to data, and I want to take a look at some blocks, I can click on blocks and it shows me a list of DWGs that were installed. So I can go down here and maybe I want to go and insert a landscape block. Well, if I expand the plus symbol for landscapes, I have a block category. I also want to point out that you can insert dimension styles, you can insert layers from another drawing, layout tabs, line styles, so forth and so on from other files. So if you find yourself that you're missing something in your drawing and you want to reuse it again, you can use Design Center and borrow those type of items from drawings. So I'm just going to select blocks here, and I just give it a second to populate the menu up on top. And we can kind of open this up to see all the blocks that are here. If we have it closed up a little bit, we have a slider that allows us to slide up or down and browse different blocks. And I'm just going to pick just something random here. Maybe I'll pick this looks like a bush or something block. If I select it, it tells me that this is actually a tree. It shows me a preview of it, and it shows a brief description. If I pick on it and drag it into my drawing, you'll see that block will follow my cursor around until I place it. If you want to be more specific as to how you place that block, you can right click on it and you can choose Insert Block, and you'll get a dialog box that comes up, and this dialog box tells you the name of the block that you're inserting. You can keep this checked for insertion point and manually left click on the screen to place it, or you can uncheck it and type in X, Y, and Z coordinate to place it. You can also scale the drawing. So if I check this box, I can place the block and then move my cursor around, and the block will adjust size according to how I move my cursor in and out from the base point of the block. And then you can choose if you want to rotate it after you place it, or you can go ahead and specify an angle here, and then you can change the units. So just real quick, I'll leave insertion point selected, scale selected, and we'll just bring it in at 45 degrees. I'll click OK. I'll go ahead and place my block, so I'm manually picking the insertion point, And then when I bring my cursor, it's trying to rotate it as well. It's rotating it around the X, Y, and Z factor. So I come in here and just kind of manually place, place how I want it. And then it placed at a 45-degree angle. Of course, this is a circular block, so it's kind of hard to tell, what a 45-degree angle is. But again, to find these blocks, you want to go to your install directory, go to the data folder, expand blocks, and then find the drawing. It's named by category, and then search that drawing for the type of blocks that you want to insert. Okay, another way to insert blocks is maybe the drawing that you have open has blocks defined in it, just like that block library that we were just looking at. So anytime you want to insert anything into your drawing, you are going to, of course, come up to the Insert menu, or the Insert ribbon. On the Insert ribbon, we have a block panel here. We have the option to create blocks, edit attributes that are in blocks, and then we can click on the Insert option here. So if I click on Insert, let's see what we get here. Here it shows the current blocks that I have in this drawing, and I can kind of come down the list here and pick. I want this this handicap cylinder here, so I'll just pick it. You can see the block is at the at my cursor. I can just come into my drawing. I have the option to choose a base point. I can scale it or rotate it. Again, just like any other command, you can pick on the option here. Type in a rotation angle that you would like, and then come up here and left click in your drawing, and then you can pick some type of scale. Left click again, or you can just press enter to accept the 1:1 scale that the block was created at. You can also come up here to insert. Notice on the bottom here it asks for more options, so I can click that, and this kind of lets me see the same list of blocks that we were looking at in this pull down menu up on the top. Of course, you can click on it. You can click on the up and down arrow to cycle through those blocks, but you can also click on browse and browse to another drawing and insert blocks from another file as well. And again, you have the same options. You have insertion point, scale, rotation, or you have the option to explode. I know we haven't talked too much about explode. Let's go ahead and take a look at how explode works. So I'm going to go ahead and click cancel. And what explode does is it takes a block and it breaks it back up into its native objects. So right now this is one object. After I explode it, I should get an arc, a line, a couple of lines in here, and a circle. So let's see what happens. So I'll go to the home ribbon. I'll come up here to modify, and I have this little explode icon. If I click on it and select the block and then press enter, come back over it, it's no longer, well, actually let me do that again. Maybe I didn't select it right. Let me select the block, right click, there we go, and then come back over it. Now you can see that we do have arcs again and lines, and it's no longer a defined block. So that's what that option is. If I come up here to insert and I choose to insert a block again, so I'll say more options, and I'll pick some block here. How about we'll do that north arrow, and I choose the explode option. That means it's going to insert the block, but then after it inserts it, it's going to explode it, and it'll be multiple objects here. So let's see what we get. So I'm just going to left click. There is my north arrow. And then if I bring my cursor up, you can see that it is not one block anymore. It is multiple blocks. So I have the option to do some editing on that block here if I want to. Okay. So that being said, let's see how we can define a block, or how do we create our own blocks. So let me go ahead. I'm going to open up another drawing here. Okay, so what I've done is I've opened up a drawing here. It's just a floor plan, and maybe this floor plan we want to put some fire bells for emergency purposes and in some of these rooms here. So I'm going to go to the home ribbon, and I'm going to set my layer to layer 0. The reason why I set it to layer 0 is because when I go to create this block, remember every drawing has the layer 0 in it. So if I create my block on layer 0, that gives me the option of setting another layer current, and then inserting my block in on that current drawing, and then that block will it'll take on the properties of that layer that I have set current. If I create a block on a layer called Firebell and make it red, then every time I go to drag in that block, it's going to bring in that layer with it as well. So you've got two options there. So I think the most common option is having the layer 0 set first and then creating your block, because this gives you some flexibility as to whenever you bring in a block, how's it going to react to layers. So just real quick here, we're just going to zoom in on the corner here, and I'm just going to use the circle command. So I'll come up here to Home, Draw, and I'll pick a circle. I'll just do a simple circle here with a radius of, well, actually we won't even specify radius. We'll just kind of just manually just kind of eyeball it here. I'll draw me a circle, and then I'm going to come up here and draw the bell portion of it. So what I'm going to do is use a little bit of my object snaps here. So let me go to my object snap settings and my object tracking settings. So I'll turn object snap on, object tracking on. We'll use endpoint, midpoint, and we'll turn on quadrant. We'll click OK, and then I'm going to invoke the line command, and I'm going to track off of this left quadrant here and click. I'm going to track off this right quadrant of the circle, come up here and click. There's my line, it's evened up, and then I'm going to come over here and choose an arc. So I'll do a 3-point arc. So we'll say start, then we'll do the top part here, and we'll do the end, and then I'll draw another arc here. We'll do it at this quadrant. We'll come out here a little bit, come up on top, do something real simple. Draw another circle here for my bell, and then I'll use the trim command. To trim out this little line here, I'll press enter again, so I don't have to select the cutting edge, and trim that line out. Okay, so here we have just a simple Firebell. Next what we want to do is we want to define it as a block. So I'm going to go to the edit menu, and I'm going to go to the block panel here, and I'm going to choose create. And when I choose create, I get a dialog box. Like most dialog boxes that come up in Civil 3D or in AutoCAD, I like to kind of read them like a book. I like to start from the top, work my way down, and go left to right. So the first thing we do is give this a name. I'm going to call this Fire Bell. And I'm going to pick a base point. So this base point is the point that's going to be used every time I go to reinsert this block into my drawing. So I'll say specify on screen, or actually instead of specify on screen, I'll just go ahead and say pick point, and the dialog box goes away. I'm going to come down here to the bottom and left click, and there's my point, and there's my X, Y, and Z coordinates. And it says the next step is to select the objects that are going to define my block. So I'm going to click on this icon here. I get the pick block or the selection. I get the pick block or the selection tool. I get the pick block or selection tool. So I'm just going to left click and drag a window around my objects. Everything is selected because it's all becomes dashed for me, so I get some feedback there on my selections. I'm going to right click. I'm back in the block definition box. I have three options here. Do I want to retain the block? Do I want to where it keeps my objects, but it also defines a block in the drawing itself? Or I just want to just go ahead and convert it into a block? Or do I want to convert it to a block and delete the objects that are there? And then I have the option to give it a description. So I'll call this a fire. I'll just give this a quick description: fire bell for emergencies. Actually, so I'll give this a description. I'll call this just fire bell block training. When I go to insert it, I can choose whether I want to allow exploding or I want to scale it uniformly. or is it an annotative block? It's not an annotative block. So it's going to go ahead and click OK. So it created a block and then it deleted it. So now what I want to do is I'm going to go to the home ribbon and I'm going to go to a different layer. And I'm just going to pick, let's say, anything I have available here. Actually, you know what? I'll create a new layer. So I'll go to layer properties. I'll create a new layer. I'll call this a Firebell. And I'm going to give it the color red. And double click on it to set that layer current. And then close out of my drawing. Now let's insert the file. So insert the block. So I'll say insert. I'll click on insert here. There is my Firebell that I created. It's been defined in my drawing. I'll click it. And I'll come down here and notice that it turned red because that is the color of the layer that I have set. And I'll just left click to place it in my file. And I'll go ahead and press spacebar and I'll place a few more of these. So I'll place one here, press enter. Yes, I do want the Firebell. I don't want to scale it, so I'll just press enter again to come in at the default location. And let me just place one more in here. So I'll press the space bar. Yes, I want the Firebell, so I'll press enter. I'm going to pick my base point, press enter a couple of times so it comes in the default way. Okay, so we have 3 instances of our Firebell. Let's say, for example, you know, this symbol isn't quite right. It needs a change to it. Maybe I want to show maybe some line work that connects these 2 objects together for my Firebell. So what I can do is I can select the Firebell, I can right click and I can go into what's called a block editor, or I can edit block in place. Let's go into let's choose the edit block in place option. The dialog box comes up and says, okay, is this the block that you want to edit? It is, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. The block turns white because it went back into its original state of being defined on the 0 layer. So what I'm going to do is just draw a line here. And I'm going to go from the top quadrant to the midpoint of that line. Notice it drew it red, so I want to be mindful that I'm on the right layer. So I'm going to select that line again and go up and put it on layer 0. Okay, so that's just a little minor change we're going to do. If you notice up at the command line that we're in a block editing mode, so I've got some extra options here that I didn't have before. So when we're done, we want to come up here and we want to make sure that we click on Save Changes. And it says, okay, you've made some changes to this block. Is that what you want to do? Yes, click OK. So I made changes. Now if I zoom out and take a look at my other blocks, they've all updated as well. So it's a really convenient way of doing mass editing to a block and having it update, especially if you've got this block occurring throughout your drawing several times. Instead of having to delete all the blocks and then reinsert them, you can just pick the one block. As long as it has the same name, you can pick it and redefine the way that block looks. Okay, so with that being said, that is all that I have for blocks. The next section we're going to look at is paper space and model space. Okay, so this next section we're going to talk about is we're actually going to talk about 2 subjects at once. We're going to talk about paper space and model space, and at the same time we are going to talk about what X-referencing is and how to reference a drawing into an existing drawing that you have open. So first, paper space and model space. In every drawing that we create in AutoCAD or in Civil 3D, we have what's known as layouts, tabs, and model tabs at the bottom corner of our screen in our user interface. On the model tab, of course, what we've been doing through these past few sessions is we've been using model space to create our drawings and create our objects and insert our blocks and things like that. And when you do that in model space, you do everything in 1 unit. Or 1-to-1 scale, which is whatever the size that the actual shape is, that's the actual size that it should be in model space. And this is so you get a correct scale when you go to scale your drawing in paper space. So in paper space, the units are actually represented by 1 unit is represented by a piece of paper. And then so you went in that paper space environment. This allows you to bring in like a title block that you would use for printing and plotting to frame up your view that's in model space, and then from there you create your print and you go from there. So let's go ahead and see how we use paper space and model space. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize that, and let me close out some of these files here. And we'll leave this this design drawing open. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to leave this design file open, and we're going to use this to reference into our new file for our plan sheet that we're going to create. So to create a plan drawing, like we've been doing before, when we go to create a new drawing inside of the state kit, we're going to go to the FDOT ribbon, and we're going to choose the create file option. And I'm going to go down my list here, and I'm going to choose the option to create a plan sheet. The output file is plan road or RD01. Again, it's placing in the roadway folder, and it's using that FDOT master template that we were looking at earlier when we were talking about layers. I've got my coordinate system set, so I'm just going to go ahead and say create open file. It's going to open that file in the background. It's going to open that file in the background. So when it's done being created, we'll just go ahead and click close. And now we have a blank file. There is nothing in it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create an external reference to this DSGN-RD file, because right now we have nothing in the plan file. So I'm going to go to the Insert ribbon, and I'm going to go to the References tab. I'm going to click on this little down arrow here, and there's a few ways we can get to the External Reference Manager dialog box. We can click on the down arrow, and that brings up the Xref Manager palette. But since we know it's a palette, we can also go to the Home ribbon and expand palettes, and we can click on this little icon here. This is usually the most common way of bringing the External Reference Manager up. The little icon looks like it's a bunch of sheet of papers or a bunch of drawings being clipped together or being referenced together. That's kind of how I decipher it. So I'm going to click on that, and I get the Xref Manager box that comes open. And right now it shows that we are looking at the Plan RD01 drawing. Okay, and that's this file here. I'm going to go ahead and click on Save. And once we click on Save, we notice a little asterisk disappeared, meaning that it's now an actual saved drawing. It's not just a drawing that we created and opened. We actually took the time and saved it, so now it's an actual saved file in our project. So up on the top here, on the top left-hand corner, we can click the down arrow, and we have different attachment options. We can attach drawings, images, DWFs, microstation DGNs, and PDFs. But here we're going to go ahead and say attach a drawing, and then we get the option to look or browse for our drawing that we want to attach. So I'm going to click on this little shortcut that I created earlier. I'm going to go to my project, and I'm going to go down to roadway, and I'm going to pick this DSGN-RD01 file and click open. Once I click open, I get an attachment dialog box. It gives me options. Okay, so similar to inserting a block, we can choose the scale. I just want to come in at a 1:1, so I'm going to leave this unchecked. I want to come in at a 1:1 scale. For insertion point, I want to come in using the same coordinates that the drawing was created at. I don't want the option to left click on the screen and misplace the file somewhere else. I want it to have the same coordinates that is in the original file itself. So always make sure that basically you have everything unchecked. You don't want to scale it. You don't want to change the insertion point. You don't want to rotate it. You want north to be north. And then you have these reference types. We have the option to do an attachment or the option to do an overlay. And basically the difference between these two is when I choose attachment, it's attached to this Plan RD drawing. So that means that if I open up a new drawing and I attach the Plan RD drawing, it's going to bring the DSG and RD drawing with it because it's attached to this file. If I choose Overlay and I attach my Plan RD drawing to another file, it's going to ignore this DSGN RD file because it's just overlaid on top of it. It's not attached to it. Okay, but in this case, since we're just creating a plan drawing, I don't see us attaching a plan drawing to another drawing. So in this case, using an attachment is just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and click OK, and then give AutoCAD or Civil 3D a minute to place the drawing. You can see that now the DWG file is showing up in the back of our drawing. Okay, so when we have the external reference box up, we have the option to come up here and attach a drawing. Before I attach a drawing, I'm going to change my layers. I'm going to go ahead and bring this layer pull down menu. If I type in X, it'll jump down and filter to all the layers that begin with X. So I'm using an Xref dependent layer. So I'm going to set that layer current, and then I'm going to come up here and choose to attach a drawing. So attach a drawing. We're in the roadway folder of the project. My DSG and RD01 file is there. I'm going to go click Open. Once I do that, I get the option to how I want to attach this file. And this dialog box is kind of similar to the way you would insert a block. You have the option for a scale, insertion point, or the way it's rotated. I always just say to leave everything unchecked when I'm creating a reference because I want it to come in at a 1:1 scale that the reference file was created at, and I want the point to come in, I want the insertion point for it to come in where the drawing was created at because I want the coordinates to remain the same. Okay, so this is important, especially if you're bringing in multiple drawings like an existing topo file and a DSG and RD or design file. You want those two to lay on top of each other. Make sure that insertion point's unchecked because if they're designed on top of each other, they're going to come in on top of each other. So leave those unchecked. For reference type, we have two types. We have attachment and overlay. What attachment means is that if I was to create a new file or open up another file and reference in this Plan RD01 drawing, it's going to bring in all the files that are attached to it. Okay, so that means it's going to bring in this DSG and RD01 file attached to it. If I say an overlay and reference in this plan drawing, it's not going to bring in the DSG and RD file because it's not attached to it. It's just going to bring in the Plan RD file. It's not going to bring in any reference files that are defined as an overlay. So I don't see us doing that with a plan drawing. So I'm just going to go and leave it as attachment, and then click OK, and then give it a moment, and you can see here that our drawing is now referencing a DSG and RD file. If I select it, down here on the bottom, it gives us additional information, such as whether if it's an attachment, I can come down here and I can change it to an overlay after the fact that I have it in here. It also tells us the path that it was found at and the path that it was saved at, and it shows us the time that date that drawing was brought in. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on the X and double click on the wheel of my mouse for zoom extents. And there is our proposed drawing that we want to frame up in our plan sheet. The next thing I want to do is let's bring in some existing topography. So we're going to bring in our existing drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and change to another layer, and then I'm going to go back to my palettes and go to Xref Manager. I'm going to say Attach Drawing. I'm going to go up a level or up a folder. I'm going to browse down to my survey folder, and I'm going to choose the topo RD01 file, and then click Open. Again, I'm going to make sure that everything is unchecked here. Attachment is fine. Go ahead and click OK. and then give it a moment, and I'm going to close out of the X, and you can see that we now have our design file and our topo file. Topo files normally reside in the background of a drawing, so just a little extra tip here. If you select the existing topography file, I can right click and say display order. This is something that we covered earlier in one of our sessions, and I can say send to back. Okay, so we can make sure that you can even see how some of the line work actually kind of popped up there a little bit. Okay, so now we have our file here. It's at a 1:1 scale. We've got two drawings laying on top of each other. Now what we want to do is take a look at our paper space and model space tabs. So here we have a model space, which is what we're in right now, and I can go over here and click on layout. And again, think of layout as being a sheet of paper. Okay, so here we have just a blank sheet of paper, but we don't have any viewports in it or anything. So what I want to do is just kind of explain what a viewport is and how it works. Notice that whenever I'm in layout, that my ribbon changed to layout tools. Over here on the left in the viewports panel, I can create different types of layouts. I can create rectangular layouts, a polygon layouts, or I can create an object and turn that object into a layout. So all I'll just do is just real quick do a rectangular layout. I'm going to come in my drawing, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a hole in this sheet of paper that allows me to view what I have in model space. So once I left click twice, I have now what's known as a viewport. So if I double click inside that viewport, I'm now in my model space, so it's kind of like working in my model tab here. Double click outside of it and I'm back into paper space. I can take this viewport and I can go ahead and resize it, and then double click inside here, and I can actually pan around and zoom how I want my plan sheet or my plan drawing to show up in the viewport. And I can kind of zoom in real close here, and you can kind of see how you can start to kind of frame it up. I can select the viewport by double clicking outside of the viewport and then picking it, and then I can come down here on the bottom right, and you can notice on the on my status bar down here, I can click on this down arrow, and I've got some scales that have been defined for me. So let's say if I click on this 1:20 scale, you can see how it kind of zooms in there. So I may have to double click back in that viewport and pan over, and now I've got a 1:20 scale for that viewport. If I click on that viewport again, I can go back and I can pick a different scale. Maybe a 1:40 is a little bit better. Oh, that's still pretty close. Let's try 1:100, and that kind of frames up more of our drawing. So that's kind of how paper space and model space work. Model is where you do your drawings at, and then your layout tab is what you define for your printing and plotting and your scaling. So we've kind of went an extra step for you using the state kit and defined some title blocks for you that you can insert into your drawing, and they already have a viewport defined in that file. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is come down to my layout tab and right click, and I'm going to choose, I want to insert a layout from a template. Okay, so I'm going to choose from template, and the select from template file comes up. It already has the file type set to DWT, and it's already pointing to where your templates are installed. Okay, so the next step is what I want to do is select a sheet, because that's what I want to do. I want to insert a sheet, I want to insert a roadway sheet, and I want to insert this sheet plan title block into this drawing. So I'm going to pick that, click open, and it says, I get a dialog box that says, okay, there's multiple layouts in that file. That means there's multiple layout tabs in there. Each one of those tabs has a name according to what the viewport is scaled to. So I could choose a 1" equals 100 scale, or I can just say a 1:1 scale and then change the scale after it's brought in. It's completely up to you. But I'm going to do it 1 scale and then show you how you change it after the fact. So I'll click OK, and then give it a few seconds here, and you'll notice that a new layout tab appears at the bottom of our drawing, and it already has a name assigned to it. Okay, so if we go over to that tab and click on the 1 scale, it'll switch over to that layout. And now is probably a good time to go ahead and save our file. So we click on save. And then we can take this, and I'm just going to hold down on the scroll wheel of my mouse, and I can pan that title block around. So next thing we want to do is we want to get our drawing that's in model space framed up inside this this title block here. So all I need to do next is just go ahead and double click in this area here, and you'll see that there's been a viewport already defined for us. Okay, and you can tell we're in a viewport when the edge of this border becomes red. So here we're in paper space. Double click outside of it. Here we're in model space. Double click outside of it. We're in paper space. All right, so click it in here. I can't really pan around or anything too much without moving the drawing around. So I need to come down here on the bottom and unlock that viewport. Okay, so now when I'm back in the viewport, I can double click on the wheel of my mouse, and that'll bring in whatever's in my model space. And when you double click, it does a zoom extent, so the whole thing kind of fits in the file. So what we're going to do is just kind of zoom in on the area that we want to frame up. So I'm just going to kind of scroll in here a little bit. I'm going to center it, and then I'm going to double click outside of my viewport to put me back in paper space. And then I want to pick that viewport to scale. Notice I have my selection cycling tool on, so at my cursor, or my crosshair, it shows that little icon with two objects laying on top of one another. It means I'm about to pick two objects, so it doesn't know which one I want to pick. So when I left click, it says, okay, I've got a block reference and a viewport under there. Which one do I want? Well, I want the viewport. And you can kind of see how in the background it gives you some instant feedback. So I'm going to select my viewport, then I'm going to come down here on the bottom, and I'm going to pick a scale. So I'm going to pick on the down arrow, and we're going to say, let's do 1 inch equals 100. And that zooms in pretty good. So I want it to stay at this scale. I don't want somebody coming up behind me and double clicking in here and maybe moving this around or zooming in and out and messing up my scale. So that's what the lock feature is for. So while I'm in this viewport, I can come back down here and lock it back down, and that keeps somebody from coming up behind me and changing the viewport or changing the scale or moving that viewport around. Okay, so we pretty much have our layout tab ready to go. Down here on the bottom it says 1 scale, so I can click in here and right click on it and choose rename, and maybe I'll call this we'll call this plan RD, and maybe it's at a 100 scale, so I'll put plan RD at 100. And then we don't really need this layout one anymore, so if you find a bunch of layout tabs that you don't need, you can clean up your drawing by right clicking on it and choosing the delete option. Again, it's just asking, are you sure you want to delete it? I'm going to click OK, and now we just have 2 files. So now if I want to continue working in here, all I'd simply have to do is go back into my DSG and RD file. I'm going to switch over to it. Let's go into our model here, and maybe I want to change my drawing up a little bit. Maybe I'll use the scale command, or actually we'll use the stretch command, and we want to stretch this object, this traffic separator back a little bit. So I'll pick it, and we'll just dial it back here some. You can kind of see how it's wanting to snap, so maybe this is where I want to come over and turn off my object snaps and my snap tracking. Okay, so I've made that little modification there. I'm going to click Save. And then I'm going to go back into my Plan RD file. Once I do that, I get a notification on the bottom letting me know that the DSG and RD file needs to be reloaded, and this is the username who made the change, so it lets you know who's making the changes as you're working on a file. So if we kind of look here, you can see that the drawing we're looking at hasn't been updated yet. But if I click on reload and just give it a moment to process, we'll see that traffic separator shrink up a little bit. See, there it goes. So that's the power behind using Xrefs and using page setups, because you can have everything set up and framed up how you want to print it, but you can continue working your drawings, and all this will live update as you continue along in your project. So I'm going to go ahead and click Save so we don't lose anything that we've worked on so far. Okay, so I just want to point out a couple of other things before we start talking about printing and plotting. Again, this is your viewport area. If you look around the viewport, you've got these dashed lines that go around the whole entire title block. Those dashed lines represent the edge of paper or the printable bounds. So if you have something that's sitting outside that dashed area, it won't show up in your print. So if you find that maybe your title block's being cut off or something, you may have to shrink it down a little bit or adjust it, because you want to make sure that whatever you're trying to print shows up inside that printable area. And then on the left hand side here, the bottom left hand corner, you have what's known as the paper space UCS icon. Notice that whenever I'm in paper space, it shows up in this state. If I double click in model space, the icon jumps over here, and I have my generic model space UCS icon. Okay. Okay, so we just talked about printing and plotting, and then we covered external references and different ways you can reference a drawing in the background, and the different options and settings for the external reference dialog box. The next thing we're going to look at is printing and plotting essentials. So what we're going to do here is we're going to learn how to get ready to print. We're going to learn how to create a page setup, or what a page setup means, how to import an existing page setup from templates if you don't have one, or maybe you've altered your old page setup so much that you don't remember what the original settings were. I'll show you how to go back and recover that. And we'll talk about how you can print one page at a time, or how you can print multiple plots at a time, which is also known as batch plotting. So with that said, let's go ahead and go back into our plan drawing that we were looking at momentarily. And let's say this is the file that we want to set up to print. So I'm going to come up here to, there's a few ways you can get to a page setup box. I want to take a look at my page setup and see, what sheet of paper is this set up to print on? What printer is it going to go to? Is this going to print out black and white, or is it going to print in color? That's all the things I need to know that's involved in a page setup. So to get to a page setup, there's a few different ways. You can either go to the application pull-down menu, and you can come down here to print, and you can choose page setup here, or you can come down to the bottom of the layout tab and right click on it, and you can choose page setup manager from here. So when I click on that, page setup manager comes up, and it shows me that I currently have FDOT size B 11 by 17 set up to go to a PDF as one of the page setups I have in here. So I wanted to use that page setup name and apply it to this layout tab. It's got the asterisk next to it. So I can select this and I can say set current. So now you see how the name changes. It has the name of the layout tab with the name of the page setup name assigned to it. Okay, so let's take a look and see what's all involved in this page setup. So I'm going to go and select the name again. I'm going to go over here and choose modify. And here this tells me that this particular page setup name, up here on the top left hand corner, it's going to go to an f.pdf.pc3 plot file. So it's going to create a PDF file for me. The page size is going to be 11 by 17. The area that I want to plot, it should be set to layout. That means it's going to print everything that you see here in layout. It's going to set everything to 0, for you, so it's going to be centered and everything. I don't want to scale the plot up or down. I want to come out to a 1 inch equals 1 foot scale, so that should already be set up for you. And here's the f.stb file. This is back when we were talking about layers. If and how the colors are assigned. So in other words, we have like color 255 assigned to a layer, it's going to come out black. If we have color 122 set to a layer, it's going to come out some type of grayscale. And we have other STB files that you can choose. So we have one that's for black and white with grayscale. We've got one that prints everything in color. The way you see it is the way it's going to print out. And by default, when you install AutoCAD, you get a monochrome and a couple of Autodesk STB files. But when you install the Stay Kit, you're going to get these two files. So for black and white files, we want to make sure that we have the FDOT.STB file selected and set. Then we have some plot options. We want to plot the object line weight, so whatever the line weights are set for the layers, we want those to come out. We want to plot with the plot styles. Again, that's these plot styles up here. Plot paper space last. That's just kind of a generic setting. Usually it's always set up. And then we have drawing orientation, meaning that we want to basically there's a kind of like common printing options, meaning we want the drawing to come out in a landscape setting. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. This says the page setup you just edited is referenced by additional layouts in the current drawing. Would you like to update the layout? So if we had other layouts in here that it was referencing, it would update those as well. I can just go ahead and say yes and then click close. And then we would come down here and then we would just finally say, we could come down here and say print from here or plot, or we could just choose the print icon up on top. This is the dialog box. If you're kind of running AutoCAD for the first time, it's going to teach you about batch plotting, and it'll bring up a help dialog box. I'm just going to go ahead and say, do not show me this again, and let's continue to plot a single sheet. So this box is going to come up. It's going to say this is the page setup name that you're using. I can change it from here as well, but I want all these settings, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. I could do a preview. Let's go ahead and click OK. And since I'm creating an actual file, a PDF, I'm not actually sending it to a printer. I'm getting the option to where do I want to save this file. So I'm going to come up here to my project. I'm going to go to the roadway folder, and I'm going to save it in this directory. And I'm going to take off, I just want it to be called Plan RD01, and click Save. I get a plot job progress dialog box. Let me know that my sheet's being created. And then after it's created, it's going to launch a preview and let me view how my PDF looks. And everything looks good. I've got a grayscale for my existing topo in the background. And then everything that I've proposed, my proposed design is sitting up front, and it's in dark lines. So that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and click on the X to close it out. Down the bottom, I get a little feedback here. Let me know that my job is complete. No errors were found, so I successfully created a plot. Next thing I would like to show you is what happens if you have a drawing that does not have a page setup. So what you can do is you can right click on this layout tab, and you can go into Page Setup Manager, and back where we were looking at earlier, we have the option to import a page setup. So let's say, for example, I can right click on that one and delete it. Okay, so I've deleted it, it's gone, I need to bring it back again. How do I do that? So I can choose import, and we can browse to our local drive. We can go into the installation directory. We can click on support, click on plot, and there is my page setup. In order to see that, you want to make sure down on the bottom that this is set to DWT, because we set this up in a template. But if I choose FDOT page setup, click open, and give it a second, it's going to reference that file and take a look and see what all page setups I have in that file. And you notice that we have a few of them set up. We have some size A, 8.5 by 11 PDFs. We have some that are set up for landscape, some for profile, 2 for profiles. We've got 11 by 17. So I want to bring in that 11 by 17 landscape one again. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. You can see that it re-imported it back into my file. I can double click on it to set it current, or I can just select it and say set current, and then click close, and we are back to where we started. Everything looks good again. Okay, so the next step we're going to cover real quick is just how to do a batch plot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create something real quick. I'm just going to select the move or copy option and create multiple copies of this layout tab. So I'll say move to the end, create a copy, click OK. You'll see it'll create a number 2 next to the end of it. I can create another one. I'll say move or copy, move to the end, create another copy, click OK. And I'll do it one more time here. I'll say move or copy, move to end, create a copy, click OK. Now we have 4 layout tabs. So I'm going to come up here and click Save. Now I want to print all these at one time. So this is where batch plotting comes in pretty handy. Okay, so we've got multiple layout tabs here on the bottom. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I can choose so I can right click on it and I can choose select all layouts, and you can see how they all highlight at one time. Then I can right click again and I can choose publish selected layouts. And what this does is brings up a publish dialog box. And if you look here in the middle, it shows all of my layout tabs that I've selected. And you can see off to the right here, it shows the page setup names that are associated to that page setup. So then the last step would be for me to do is just come in here and say publish, and it would publish all these as one PDF. I have a few other options in here. I can come out and click I can click the plus symbol here to add sheets. So what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to go out to another drawing and select it, and then it'll let me pick which layout tabs in that drawing I want to add to this list. So you can build upon this list. Once you get this list set up, you can save this as a sheet list. So let's make a few changes here. Let's say I'm going to select all these. I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose copy selected sheets, and it made a copy of them down on the bottom. So maybe I want to send a set to a PDF, but maybe I want to create another set. I want this other set to have a different page setup. So maybe here I might have something set up for like color, or maybe I have another page set up that I'm actually sending to a printer. So I could have a set create a PDF and a set being sent to the printer at the same time, or I can have a set come up as color and a set come up as black and white. You can pick these and you can move them up or down. So if you needed to change the order of these, you can click on the up or down arrows. If you have sheets in here that you don't want, you can click on the minus symbol and it removes those sheets. But back when I was talking about the sheet list up here on top, I can give this sheet set a name, or this sheet list a name. Okay, so you notice when I pick on this, it says the drawings has unsaved changes. Save the file. So let's go up here and let's save it. So I'm going to go ahead and click cancel here. And let's repeat that step again. So we'll say select all layouts, right click, I want to publish selected layouts, and then let me come up here and click on the save. There we go. So now that I've saved that file, saved the changes that I may have made, I can maybe save this out to the desktop, and I'll just call this plan sheet list. Click save. So if at some point I want to come back and reload all the sheets and layout tabs that I have in here without having to do anything manual, I could just come up here and click on the browse option and browse to that sheet list that I just created. So that's a nice little feature. And then, you know, as I said before earlier, when you're ready to finish this up, one more thing, you can come down here and you can actually specify the number of copies. So you can tell how many sheets or PDFs or prints that you want to create as well. And then you click publish, and then you're all done. Okay, so that pretty much wraps it up for printing and plotting. What I'd like to point out real quick, if you have the state kit installed, or once you get installed, go up here to the FDOT ribbon on the top right hand corner, and under the help panel you can choose links and contacts, and then take a look at what we have here for CAD resources. When you click on that down arrow, you can go to our events and presentations page. We have some Autodesk resources that we have listed. CAD manual, we have FDOT Civil 3D Quick Clips. If you select on Quick Clips, what this does is gives you kind of a breakdown on how each one of these tools here on our tool palette works. You just click on it. It's like maybe 1, 2, 3 minute little videos. From here you can also get to our FDOT Civil 3D YouTube channel. So we've got a lot of our workflows and how-tos posted in our own FDOT YouTube channel online. If you go back to CAD resources, you can come down here to our production support page, and then scroll down here to the bottom to posted webinars, and then scroll down here to the bottom, and then we have under printing and plan production. So if you want to learn more about how to set up your project using FDOT, how to create drawings, how to organize them in an index using Sheet Set Manager, and how to create prints, whether it's plan and profile sheets or cross sections or what have you. We've got a plan of productions part 1 and part 2 that I highly recommend that you take a look at, and it gets more into detail about setting those things up. And I welcome you to explore these other options that we have in here, such as state of Florida county maps. It brings you to our webpage where you can download PDFs that you can insert into your drawing as background images for maybe key sheets or something. The events and presentations on the top, you can come in here and we have other presentations, whether it's a regional training or the Design Expo or the FLUG, which some of you may be familiar with. I invite you to look at those as well. So with that said, that is the end of my Autodesk Civil 3D AutoCAD Essentials presentation. We have a link there for additional FDOT training resources. Please visit FDOT.gov/CAD/default.shtm. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you and have a great day.